Okay.
Good
The
morning,
ticket is still not
and welcome to the closing session of Kopano, Envisioning Change Scenarios for the Future. It is a great privilege and honor to be on this panel and moderating. It says something about the space that we're in. It says that we can close a conference like this with a young voice, and that we can come and think about what the future holds. And so I think that many of you would be aware that I've been quite critical of the space because I feel like it's our place as the youth to be critical about the spaces that we work in. And so to ease the process, what we're going to do is have short provocations from our guests, our panelists, and then from the provocations we'll come back to the audience, we'll take a round of engagements, come back to the panel again, reflect on those engagements, come back to the audience, and then we'll wrap up. So I'd like to introduce my panel to you. They will self-introduce. I'll just introduce them by name. So we've got Tiffany Mugo from Hola Africa, Jabu from Iranti, and Karina
from Lambda.
So I'm just going to give it over to you, Karina, and we can work our way back. Could you please do a short introduction?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy and very excited to be in this place here today to share some ideas and to collect some also, because I'm stealing your ideas and taking back home. My name is Karina, as was said here. I work for Lambda, MOZ, in Mozambique, based in Maputo, and I work as part of the communications and documentations team.
Hi, everybody. This is what youth looks like. I'm Jabu. I'm one of the co-founders of Iranti, which is a media advocacy organization. We use media to advance trans, lesbian, and intersex rights in the region. And I'm really excited to be sharing some of, my own experiences from starting an organization, my own lessons, and hopefully looking at how we all accelerate change from there.
Hello. So it's like having your own voice in your head. I'm Tiffany. I'm from Hola Africa. That's mainly what I do. When I'm not doing that, I'm just trying to pay my bills. It's always good times. So it's really exciting to be in this space and to see so many young people. And to just, because I'm used to being in LGBT spaces where a lot of the people are very, very established. And they come and they say all the wisdom and they take up all the space on all the panels and then we all leave and we go home. So this will be fun.
So I thought that we could speed up the process a little bit. We've had a lot of engagements over the last few days, and I think that there were 5 key kind of areas which I thought we could highlight and start the provocation from there. So over the last few days, we've spoken about movement building. And I think that movement building really speaks to this intergenerational conversation that needs to take place, something that we've been trying desperately to do in this space. But it's difficult to do that because the intergenerational gap may be big, and that could be for a number of reasons. But we would like to work together. The second one is intersectionality, and the intersectionality of our movement, the intersectionality of our own identities. But also to think of the intersectional experiences that come into this space. I'm amazed by the demographic in the space, but I wonder about some things. I wonder about how it is that people can gain access to the space with disabilities. I wonder about whether we think about the fact that we're sitting here with sex workers and minority groups that don't have rights. I wonder about those intersections. Are they things that we've thought about actively? And so that's one of the provocations. And then I thought about youth and sustainability and knowledge building. Earlier on in the session, I think it was Ricky who was saying, when do we pass on the baton? When's that moment where we pass on the baton? And when we're doing so, are we saying that older activists, established activists, should leave? Are we saying that we can start working together with one another? Are we creating room for sustainable change? Then we came to the issue of self-care. And I think it's been repeated many times in these spaces. And I think that a lot of us are repeating that because we've watched those that we've grown up under. The established activists suffer from burnout, often. It happens. We don't talk about it enough, and perhaps we need to. And then lastly, language and inclusivity. I think that we've had many discussions about the LGBT Sometimes we include the I, sometimes we include the A, the Q, but we pick and choose. Are we erasing people that are even sitting with us in this space? And if we're doing that, how do we mend that? So I think that the session is twofold. One, we need to be critical and think about what it is that's happening in the space, but simultaneously, we've got an opportunity here to make a very positive narrative come out in the next few years. And so I'd like to hand over to the panelists. If you could offer a short provocation, maybe based in this framework that we've given. So, Jabu, perhaps I can start with you.
Okay, and that was great, thank you. I think my provocation is just based on the collective conversations we've had over the last 2 days, is for us to think about how do we integrate all the elements of the concerns that were raised. So how do we integrate the issue of vulnerability as a strength and not as a space of division? You know, because I think many of us in the space, including myself, is the experience about when you're vulnerable, we all find the ability to be adaptive, right? So if you don't have money, you're going to figure out what's the next plan. If you don't have a meal, you're going to figure it out, right? So in a way, when we think about our vulnerability as a movement, how do we think about that as a space of coming together and not as a space of tearing us apart, right? So that's one thing that I think we need to hold each other in a way. And especially because we all have the power and the resources in this space to be adaptive. We've adapted so many times over and over, right? Gals, you've been raided. You know, Linda, you've been in the movement so long, and I've seen leadership grow and grow. So we all have seen that adaptivity, the growing trans movement in the region, right? We take our vulnerabilities and we make ourselves stronger. And I think that's a huge strength in relation to accelerating change. The other thing that I want to talk about is how do we think about this adaptiveness as resilience? Right? It's the resilience that we keep going. Sometimes we just hate each other, but we also need each other, right? So we love each other in ways that we don't say it, but we do. We only have each other, and what is that power in terms of that change? So I'd like us to think about that in terms of the future. That the future isn't dark and under-resourced and scarcity, but the future is us. And the future is us in our resilience. The world is getting harsher. Our presidents are being more vile, okay? There are things that are acting up against us. The religious right and their construction of what they are now calling the gender ideology. In other words, we all belong to some cult. How do we remain and retain our resilience in that particular way? And then the interconnectedness. I think we have to acknowledge that we are interdependent. That even if you are small in the space, and even if you are big, we are interconnected. The big only exists, the other foundation only exists because of the small. Okay? Iranti also exists in its regional work because of the small. And we're not large necessarily, but how do we think about small and large as interconnectedness? And I think that's a very key thing we need to think about, that right now in this room, we are in this macro space, making up all the different components, right? And we are all those components, and we are all the small making up this macro, okay? So that's something we need to embrace and think about our power in that regard. And then it allows us to think about possibilities. And I think when we think about the future and accelerating change, let's think about that possibility of what is the next future steps around the kind of scholarship we want to create, the knowledge, the power of what we are sharing here in terms of that change. And then again, I want to say, let's keep practicing and experimenting. Let's keep doing what we're doing. We make mistakes. Let's talk to each other. But the most important thing that I want to provoke in this space is that if we do not have trust, we do not have a movement. If we do not trust each other, that we can hold each other, we do not have each other's backs. And we don't have each other's interests at heart. And how do we, if trust is broken, how do we restore? If the linkages are not linked, we can't accelerate change. Okay? And I think that's the parts of the healing. It's the parts of how we all are grappling with so much internalized oppression, colonialism, racism, classism, the international and us. Let's think about those things and use our strengths in our vulnerabilities in how we push ourselves forward. And let's build the trust. If it's not there, let's work on it. If any of us in each other's spaces have harmed each other, let's find the connection to heal. Because if we don't, the religious right is coming for us. Trump is there. Whoever else is coming for us. And we're weak. We become weaker. So for me, that's the provocation of when we think about a movement, where are we moving towards together in that sense?
Thank you so much for that. Karina, I know that you're going to have to step out a bit later. And so perhaps you could offer your provocation as we go ahead?
Yes, I was having trouble framing ideas around this, envisioning a future. And it only started making sense to me when I set the starting point of questioning, what future are we talking about? What is this change that we are trying to bring, and what really are we trying to achieve? And so I believe that we need to start talking about bringing real, meaningful, solid change. And for me, that is the type of change that doesn't just happen overnight. It happens over years, decades, generations even maybe. And so it's something that takes time to prepare and takes time to happen. So my provocation is maybe that we don't have to accelerate. Maybe we have to slow down. Maybe we have to take it slow, collect ourselves, and take time to know what exactly, where are we going, who are we, what is it that we're trying to achieve. I feel that sometimes we get lost in speaking about a community, movements, communities, and we get lost because we don't take time to look at individuals. These communities are made of people, individuals that themselves are an entire universe. We have to look at these individuals in this holistic way. Their bodies, their minds, their hearts, what moves them, what makes them freeze, what gives them motive, what makes them stop. And I think when we have that figured out, we will be able to see what is connecting this person to the next, and that person to the next one. And we will find a common ground, and we will be able to build a common front, and then we will be able to speak about a movement, a community, because we will be connected and we will be fighting the same fight. Throughout these days, the issues of visibility and representation have been rising up very frequently. And I believe that is because we are not taking time and we are not being open to each other. We need to sit down and speak frontally and directly and open. Strip ourselves of our egos and what we think that we believe and what we take as granted, and really be able to have an open dialogue. And then we will be able to find this movement and this change that we're looking for. We speak about engaging with other sectors. We speak about trying to look for this representation in other sections of life and society. But I think also we have to stop and think, are we even prepared to take these spaces? What are we going to do when we get there? How are we framing this? I think it's very important for us to really take time and have critical analysis, have critical thinking, and strategize, and really know what we're going to do when we get there. How am I going to prepare myself now to really get there? And acknowledge the spaces that we are in. it was spoken here that we are products of many things. We have a heritage. What we are today was built generations ago, and it has been passed down generation after generation. And we are now in the position to pass things down to other generations. So we have to think, what am I passing down? What is it that I want to continue? What is it that I want to prevail here? What is it that I want to be my legacy? And many times, we are not even prepared to engage in those spaces. We have to think, okay, so I'm thinking about, okay, economic empowerment, but how prepared am I? Do I really know what economic is? You know, how am I thinking of engaging in the spaces and with these people? So my provocation is that maybe let's not speak about accelerating, or our accelerating should be through slowing down a little.
Thank you so much. So Tiffany, I mean, I love sitting on panels with you because you always, excuse my language, fuck shit up, and I think that there's been a lot of angst in the space to get to a point where we say what we can't, what we haven't been saying, what has to be said, and so perhaps with your provocation, we can get to that space.
Why must you put me on blast like that?
Always.
Now if I say nothing of worthwhile, people are going to be like, psh, this one. So my question is to everyone, and this is something I've experienced from being in a lot of conference spaces, seeing a lot of things, seeing a lot of engagements, is both the panelists, you guys have like brought up this notion of coming together as a movement and, you know, supporting each other. But the question is, I think what we really need to ask ourselves, especially the generation coming in, as it were, is do we really want to be squad? Like, that's the real question. Because we come to these conferences, people hook up, people do the most, people get drunk, and then people go back to their general spaces and barely talk to each other again. Like, and they only find each other next time. Or they have like little WhatsApp groups because, you know, you really liked her style while she was here. But like, at the end of the day, when it comes to it, you find a lot of organizations doing the exact same work, a lot of individuals doing the exact same work, but are subverting each other. Like people doing things like going to funders and bad-mouthing people. Like, so I think what I would really, really want to ask is when we're trying to talk about how we're trying to make the world safer for LGBT people, to what extent are we making it safe for ourselves? And I think that's really something that we really need to start asking ourselves, not only in our professional spaces, but also in our private spaces. Like, to what extent are we allowing people who have gone and hurt us in our private spaces to come and be the foghorn for other people, to come and be our representatives in the worldwide? Like, you have people who have been doing the work for ages and, you know, they're in a space, but they've been the only ones in that space. So how are we talking about growing as a community, about coming forward, about the next generation, if we're not even allowing other people into the space? We're not even allowing our own into the space, but we're expected to be let into other spaces. So my question to everyone, and it's very short. I was going to come and put up nude photos and all sorts of things. Not my personal nudes, others. But like, because that's what I do, and like my thing is about building a community and, you know, having conversations and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think one of the conversations we need to start having within our community is how are we subverting each other? And when we talk about being squad and we talk about being a community, are we taking into account the fact that there's reasons I don't fucks with you? Like, there's reasons why I don't want to mess around with you. And it's nice when the funders are there, or it's nice when like the other foundation bring us all together and we're happy and we're doing tiny videos and we're talking about how we spoke as Botswana. But then when we go home, you're like, psh, that bitch though. Or psh, I don't fucks with that person. So I think it's one of those things where before we can start talking about, hey, guys, you know, we're a community, to what extent are we really supporting each other? And to what extent are we really willing to support each other in our work, in our private spaces, and in all the things we do? Because until we can do that properly, I don't understand why anyone would think that we can actually uplift ourselves if we can't even stop being violent to each other. So that's it, really.
So what an incredible privilege to sit with a young panel. Even young at heart, you know. It was an addition. It was even young at heart.
You were 21 years young.
It's indeed a privilege to sit with a panel that's young, to sit with a panel that is actively doing the work to envision this future. But the contentions haven't really been on the panel themselves, but in the room. And so perhaps in terms of provoking questions and dialogue in the room, we could take a round of hands. Let's maybe do 3 in the first round. And perhaps you can give a contribution in terms of what your experience has been so far of Kopano. But, sometimes I think people get frustrated with us because we're always pointing out the bad things. But then maybe we can point out something that we're not happy with and think about the solution succinctly, or a suggestion for a solution. I don't think the purpose of this panel is to come up with concrete actions. I think we're more thinking about what things can change in our community in order to accelerate that change. If we're going to slow down, perhaps we need to do that. But can you say, I know that you mentioned privilege the other day. Where's the space to talk about that kind of privilege? And maybe we can take a round of 3. So can you say, I saw you with the first hand. The second hand is over there. Is there someone on this side?
There's one there.
Where?
Back there.
Ah, okay, fantastic.
Hi. Okay, so this is going to be a comment / provocation / me choosing the hill that I want to die on. Just a disclaimer that if I lose my job or I can't find work anywhere else, then know that shit popped. So what I want to address is something that, as young people in the room, there's no way we can not talk about this. And especially with the first 3 themes that you spoke about, movement building, which requires capacity, intersectionality of our lives, and youth sustainability and knowledge. Now, the chat is, in order to really, there are a number of factors, but to really maintain and sustain young people in organizations, we need to get paid. And we are not talking about the economics of working within the NGO sector and the fact that we are apparently supposed to suffer for our passion and that we are not supposed to put forward our invoice or we are not supposed to cost what our labor is. So, you've got a room filled with young black people who are landless and dispossessed, so certainly money is an issue. Right? And this is not to say that struggling organizations must now come up with a way of paying us thousands of rands, but the people that have the power and influence in this room need to start taking very seriously the fact that you're not paying the young people that are doing so much labor and so much work. You are keeping us in these internship slabs and you're not willing to make us, upward mobility situations, and that's why we've got old people who've got these stagnant, old, crusty ideas and keep on doing the same things over and over again. It's a reality, right? Okay. So you've got young, black, landless and dispossessed people who are being paid stipends, Indoni 3,000, Indoni 5,000 per month, with all the burdens that we need to take care of. So really, and the black tax also, right? So these are conversations that we really need to start thinking about, and the fact that the organizations that we work for need to start investing in us. Stop hiring these consultants from outside to come do the work that we already started doing on the inside. What we need is, we need mentorship, right? So from the older generation, if really you need to utilize whatever power and influence that you have to invest in us so that we stay, so that more of us can actually join the sector and things will start happening. You cannot accelerate if asna mali, it simply doesn't work, right? So guys, maybe I'll lose my job, I don't know, but like.
The second one's there.
Good morning, my name is Kane, I'm from Botswana. My input is, like what the moderator have said, we really need to pat ourselves in the back and appreciate our capacities. For example, we really are a gifted community. We are gifted organizations. We are a gifted region. When we started a couple of years ago, we learned how to operate, how to function, how to run an organization. We went and had a benchmarking trip with Lambda in Mozambique. And right now we have an organization that is functioning very well. And now to show that, we've also been able to mentor 2 other organizations. We actually had 2 of their directors who were starting up organizations coming into Lakavivo, and they were there for about 2 months. We're teaching them how to run an organization, how to do their advocacies and everything. So we do have to find a way of believing in our capacities. We do have such capacities, we just need to appreciate it. That's the first step, to know that we have those capacities and we are able to do it. And then as other people, we don't necessarily need to go out of the movement to find capacities. We have to go. We are aware that, for example, Iranti is good in doing media and documentation and all that. We don't have to go elsewhere. We know that we have Iranti in the movement. If we want that capacity enhanced, we know where to go. Yeah, and one question per person. Okay,
Yes,
thanks.
please. The third hand was there at the back.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
My contribution, we envisioning the future, the change, and for the past these 3 days, I have been very worried about how our future will look like because of the fact that there is a group that we have excluded for so many years, our kids. As LGBTI community, some of us have our kids, and the narrative have been a bad one because of the fact that I also had to experience the stigma and discrimination around having a kid as a lesbian, and issues around you're not a proper lesbian because you have a kid, or you're not a proper LGBTI, you are a fake and everything. And I think in our discussions or every time when we meet, we have heard so many stories about the narrative that we have been created, and end up most of us hiding our kids, or most of us talking about how we were raped to have the kids that we have. And I know some of us, that is reality. But I want us to go and as we go back and envision our future, how is it our future is gonna be like if we are still keeping them somewhere hiding or whatever. I think it is time now we change the narrative, because what if even in whatever situation that the kid is there, we all know that kids are a gift from God. So I'm envisioning this future. Without them, what is it gonna be? I think that is what my contribution is. It's like.
So thank you so much for those responses. As I said, we'll do another round shortly, because what's important here is that when we're charting a way forward 3 years into the future, 5 years into the future, it's all good and well for us to have our opinions, but it's our collective opinion that matters. It's not just a community, but multiple communities that need to speak. And we need to take stock of that. Jabu, I'd like to start with you, actually. We're talking about upward mobility. We're talking about getting paid. We're talking about, mentorship. These are things that you mentioned in your initial provocation. Could you perhaps reflect for a minute on what it would look like practically for us to have these things implemented?
Okay, well, I can just speak practically from my experience, not from my imagination as such. When Iranti started, we wanted to be a black queer-led media advocacy organization. The majority of us who started in the organization have no media skills. We self-taught, we self-trained, but we were determined to use media as the tool for what we want. Okay. We used the tool of media, and over time, what we did when we started, and we're 5 years old now, we invested internally. We brought in capacity to help us. Most people offered their skills for free. Some of our colleagues went to the market photo workshop for training. We made do with one camera, one laptop. That's how we started. And my old 1990 Toyota Corolla. And when you have the imagination for what you want to create as change, resource is not the obstacle. The obstacle is imagination for change. Resources follow the imagination and the desire for change. We pursued, even 5 years on, our work isn't perfect. We're not groundbreaking Hollywood stories. We don't desire to be that. We just want to be activists using these tools to say and to advocate for change because we're so invisible on the internet. We're so invisible on mainstream media. We want to use our cell phone, our little point and shoot. So when you think about what do you imagine that change to be, the other thing about this imagination of change is that we were tired of the West telling African stories. We needed to claim that. We needed to say, the weapons of change and narratives is in our hands. We're forever taking selfies outside. This is the weapon of change. When we think about how violations are being reported now, it's not us calling the journalist down the road to come and report on it. It is us reporting that, right? So I want to start there and say that's still what drives us in our work and what keeps us growing in our work. So that, I don't know if I'm going off point, but I do want to connect just quickly on a comment that was made earlier. I think for me, the concern about the divisions is that, for example, on youth, the youth don't have to be advancing off the backs of the argument of the elderly, because we do need to talk about the vulnerability of the elderly. LGBTI people, I work and I do not have a retirement annuity, okay? I give my life to this movement and I earn an income, but when I leave this movement, who is going to take care of me? When I retire, where will I go? Which elderly home is going to take care of me? We have a generation of LGBTIQ elderly people that we are shunning aside because we think they are disposable. And I want us to please correct this narrative, because elderly people, one, are not disposable, and secondly, are immensely vulnerable. I don't know how many times there are elderly people in our community that have Christmas alone because their partner died. How many people are living in isolation and lonely because they're no longer considered sexy? They're no longer considered desirable. And we are perpetuating these things when we talk about intergenerational. And I do think that there's a particular vulnerability around the elderly that is very pertinent in terms of wellness, health care, and just self-care and psychosocial care. And I would like us at some stage, maybe the next Kopano can think about the elderly and how do we address issues of the LG, within our community.
So Karina, in the context of Lambda, there was mention made of how Lambda kind of engages with other groups, tries to kind of provide training and capacity support and that type of thing. But in relation to the comment that Jabu just made about the vulnerability of an older generation, as someone who would identify as youth, what is your opinion on, bridging that gap? Because one, there's a very strong youth voice that says we need space, we need room to be, we need room to grow, we need room to come into our own and to make the change that we want to see. But there's also a very valid point on the other side saying the sector forgets us when we get old. And that's something that seldom gets discussed. Do we want to be forgotten as youth when we get to a certain age? Do we want to be forgotten by the sector that we've dedicated time to and our lives to? What are your thoughts?
I think that we can start by not creating this division we have to accept that we are at different stages at life and whatever, but we have to see each other as just one movement. And it's each other's responsibility to take care of the other. So in my thoughts, in my activism, I'm not just being active for myself as a young whatever I am, but for the collective. So I think if we have that in mind, we will be able to, and again, I think it's because of the work that I do, I am very long-term. So we will be able to have these long-term strategies and way of thinking, and will encompass all of us in all different stages of life and experiences that we might have been going through.
Tiffany, when you retire, where are you going? Like
don't know.
when the sector is ready to do what we're pointing out as something glaring, and I think the conversation has been coming a long time in this conference about this age gap. There's a large demographic of youth in this space, but there are also our elders, our parents, our comrades, our teachers. Where do you go when you retire? What do we think about that? We're the technological generation. Do we think about that?
No, we never think about tomorrow. But I think also one thing that we're missing out of the conversation is there's this, so to give myself as an example, I keep making this joke how I'm retiring from the hustle at the end of this year because I'm going back to school to be a sex therapist, right? But, and so people are like, oh, are you leaving the sector? And I'm like, but a lot of the work I do, because with Holla Africa, a lot of the work I do is based in sex and sexuality, but within the community and looking at yourselves and how you engage with sex, especially as a queer woman. So the work that I'm doing is not technically me leaving the sector, and it goes back to some of the points that are raised, how we have incredible hustles that are happening. So I think we need to have a more nuanced idea of what being in the sector is. So you can be in the sector, but you can be an artist who will be continuing to do the work for art for like ages. Like Jabu, when you eventually retire, baby, go and like consult in Hollywood. Leave it all behind. Like do the best life, everything you've done. So I think it's a case of, in terms of like even intergenerational like conversations and also thinking about ourselves as the LGBT sector, we're not all just doing one thing. There's not this whole one thing that once you finish doing it, then you will be cast out. Like the way you're doing communications, it doesn't mean that you need to stop doing communications. It's the same way if you work for a bigger company, if you work for corporate, not everyone in corporate is doing one thing. So now the minute they stop doing that one thing, suddenly they're not in the corporate world. So I think that's something we need to start thinking about as sort of like LGBT people, and even like the way the lovely lady here who's on her phone was saying that that there's ways that there's hustles that we have and there's things we need to be paid for, and there's ways that our skills are marketable. And I think that's also something we need to start thinking in terms of like the work we do even as ourselves. Yes, we're working for the LGBT community, but we live also in a world where like it's the rise and rise of entrepreneurs. So you can give your hustle anywhere. So give it to your like local thing. But I know if a corporate person comes up to me and is like, Tiff, I need you to write something, I can write a shit ton about the LGBT community, but if you're gonna pay me £100 to write something else, I'm gonna do it. So like diversify that portfolio and also understand that you are so nuanced. I've seen all these like comics about how we are more than just the LGBTI community. So you are more than just an LGBTI activist. There's so much more to you and there's so much more you can do. So I think that's the conversation we also need to have.
So I think I need to throw it back out. We're talking about the LGBTI community. In this LGBTI community, who are we talking about? Because we are the LGBTI community/communities, but who are we? Are we just the LGBTI? Have we considered that we have different experiences as the LGBTI? Are we considering the fact that there are socioeconomic differences that are stark, that make our work very different to one another? And then also I wanted to flip the script a bit and to think about the elderly or the older activists or, mature activists, mentors, trainers, friends, capacitators. They're vulnerable at a certain stage in time. But what about the vulnerability of youth? Are we not vulnerable when we're not getting paid? Are we not vulnerable in the places that we're sitting in because our organizations don't grow? Are we not vulnerable where we are excluded from funding opportunities? And I'm not saying this because we're playing oppression politics. I'm not saying this because one struggle is bigger than the other. I'm saying this because there's always two sides to a story. 3 hands, and then we've got to wrap up. I think I'm running out of time. Can we go 1 there, 2 here, 3 at the back?
Good morning, everyone. First of all, activist on a, I don't know if you Google the normal on a salary scale, is there a salary for an activist? It's something I'd like to know, because I believe if you're an activist, you don't go advocate and stand for what you believe in for money. It's for your passion, and it's a passion of changing and sensitizing the world that your rights are your rights. And I believe that we, as people from the LGBTI sector, should stop the segregation amongst each other. Because you want to find that the L is going to look down on the B, and the B is going to look down on the T. The T looks down on the G. So once the other part of us look down on each other, who's going to initially take us into consideration when the other world out there is not going to understand why are these people fighting amongst each other? Why are they jealous of each other? Why are they bad-mouthing each other? So we have to unify each other as that collective of an umbrella. And as activists, I believe there are those so-called celebrity activists who has been in the industry for decades. They are the ones who need to mentor the young generation that are growing. Because back then, being in the activism field, there was no money, there was no funding. Funding is making things easy now. The Western is investing its money, but back then there was no money invested, and people were scared to stand up and say that I'm part of this community because there was no opportunity. So I think even them, yeah, they are old, manje sizotsho njalo, but we have to give them that recognition and honor them, because without them having been there, I don't think some of us would have been here. So I thank you.
I have a lot to say, but I think I need to start by saying I think the issue has become, actually started when we get paid for activism. I know that we need money to live, but the fact that, you know, activism has been turned into jobs, you know, paid jobs, that creates a lot of issues, because now, number one, organizations cannot have the freedom to express themselves or to do whatever they need to do because funders are actually in control. And funders are the ones setting the agenda, which is not even relevant on the ground. You're asking us, who is this LGBTI or LGBTI communities? For someone who's not in the sector, LGBTI is HIV, because funders only give us money for HIV work. So in my understanding, funders do not care about our socio-economic issues or the factors that lead people to actually, you know, being infected by HIV and AIDS. So now, what are the funders saying? So the funders give us money and we say yes, we just say yes to everything, because we need to maintain the organizations, we need to maintain our lifestyles. But at the end of the day, our struggle gets, you know, compromised. Number two, we need to talk about the abuse that employees face in our NGOs. The abuse is so bad. And this is not an issue of age or whatever. The abuse of employees in organizations, especially in NGOs, is so appalling, you'd be shocked. And for me, I would expect a working environment that allows me or gives me the freedom to be. But you find that it's even worse than what is outside. So we need to change within the organizations, we need to change within the community. The education that we are actually busy with, you know, with our stakeholders and whoever, needs to start within the sector. Well, we don't have time, but I think I will cut it there.
All right. Just two quick points. I think a lot has already been said in this regard, but I just wanted to reiterate a conversation that I think we've picked up in quite a number of sessions flowing from this Copano, that we need to invest, and I think this, for me, chanting the way forward, we as LGBTI communities need to invest a little bit more of our efforts working with and within other struggles. As indicated before, we are more than just who we identify as according on the lines of sexual orientation and gender identity and so on. In charting the way forward, I would like to see more work within us with the homeless, more work with us insofar as fighting for what you call it if you're a student, fighting for free education, and all of those things. If it means that in your own community there's issues with water, and I'm going to refer to people in Cape Town in South Africa, if it means there's issues with water in your own community, don't say I will not attend community meetings because I'm not affected, and only want people to attend meetings when a lesbian or a gay man has been violated. I really think we need to, in chanting the way forward, think a little bit more about how we're going to make sure that our voices are heard and that our activism is experienced in more than just our own LGBTI work. So that's just one quick one. But the second quick one I wanted to leave us with is, and I indicated when we had a conversation in the first day, that a lot of us forget that at some point in our lives we have been young. And for me, young has got nothing to do with age, but it has a lot to do with where you've been in a position where somebody wants to tell you what and what not to do. And the question is, how have you risen above that, and how have you used your own wisdom, your own intellect, and your own experience and expertise to change the discourse? And somehow, in our own activism, in our own work, and it's not only within LGBT organizations, it's even for those that are in corporate, those are in spaces that are not necessarily conducive for LGBT activism. The question is, how are you changing those spaces? How are you changing the narrative and how we are viewed in those spaces? And I think for me the frustrating thing so far is I see a lot of LGBTI people who grow within the LGBTI movement. They take a whole lot of skill, they go into the corporate world, and when they are there, the activism goes. We struggle for funding, and yet they are CEOs, they are top managers, they are not giving back. So we can talk forever about agendas being set by donors. We forget that there's a whole lot of us that are already on the other side, but we are not giving back and we are not changing the narrative or changing the funding so that the work that we are aware of is happening on the grassroots is actually sponsored, is actually supported.
So I'm aware that we're running out of time. So I'm going to ask the panel if you could please make a closing remark and try and keep it brief, but really think about what you'd like to leave with our audience after this discussion in terms of where you, in your current position, are thinking the future could lie. Can we start with you, Karina?
Yes. I would say that yes, we do have pressing issues. Yes, we do have things that are happening now, and we need to answer now. But we also have to stop and think, until when do we want to just be reacting to what is happening, reacting to trends, to perceptions, and external things? So we have to, my call is that we have to start thinking long-term and taking time to really strategize and create a common conscience and a common pathway. And also linking with what was many times said here, if we want to take these spaces, if we want to be in position to be able to leverage and negotiate, we have to work on ourselves. We have to take education and specialization seriously, because there are certain spaces that we will only be able to enter, and we will only have a voice if we are presented in some way. We have to understand and acknowledge the context that we live in. It's capitalistic, it's sexist, patriarchal, etc. So we have to understand that and take that understanding into our benefit. That's it.
Thank you. Jabu.
For me, I think what's key is to think about the fact that change is constant. So we are always evolving, and that the conversation about change is not happening later. It's happening right now. This is the space it's happening in. Let's find the connections to do that. And finally, I also think that nothing is a failure, and that everything is a lesson, and we move from there.
Tiffany.
Basically, I just want to say, look internally, because I think we can't fix anything externally until we look internally. So figure out who you fucks with, who you don't fucks with, why you like people. This thing of pretending that we're a community simply because of the sex and sexuality thing is not a real thing.
Yes.
Because when it comes down to it, we would rather throw each other under the bus than actually come together. So now the minute we start thinking and looking at each other and me, I'm like, I don't feel this dude. It's fine. It's okay. I don't feel them. It's fine. Then we can actually start having real conversations, forming real networks, forming real support systems, and actually forming a community that represents who we really are. And something that is strong, something that is sustainable, something that won't get knocked over by the next round of funding or the next round of this or the next round of etc. So I think that's all I want to leave people with.
So in closing this session, I'd like us to just think for a second, mental image. All of these conversations have been around how it is that we progress as a movement, how it is that we see the future. But there is no tree without roots. There are no flowers without roots. There are no fruits without roots. And if we're going to forget where we came from, if we're going to forget the experiences that we've had, if we're going to forget what lessons we've learned, we're never going to have the opportunity to have a future. Thank you so much to the panel. It's been wonderful. It's been hard. I know we all want to talk for hours. Thank you so much to you for engaging. And thank you to Kopano for allowing this session to end in the way that it did.
Thank you.